For this portrait technique, you need to have your picture printed out, and then you need to have a piece of paper that you can work with to trace your project or your portrait onto. But you're going to start out by shading the back of the printed out portrait. And I would use a softer pencil, so 6B would be perfect for this. And I'm just using the back side of that printed image, and I'm shading the back the best that I can, so I'm trying not to miss any areas. I'm shading across at a different angle just to make sure that I covered everything. That way I'm going to flip it back over, trace it, and I won't miss anything when I'm tracing. If there's a spot that you don't cover well enough in pencil, it's not going to show up too well when you start to trace. But I would line up that portrait where you want it to be, and then I am putting tape on the top of it just to make sure that it's not going to move around on me, and the bottom as well to keep it in place. And then I would switch to a 2H pencil, which should have been in your art kit, and start tracing around the outside of your portrait. So if you lift it up, you'll be able to see a thin line there coming off of the area that you shaded. I wouldn't necessarily outline every detail as you're doing this, but I would go around some of the larger areas, the larger highlights, shadows, and then facial features to get the correct proportions and placement. I would still go around some of the details so that you have them there, but it will make it a lot easier and simpler to follow and fill in if you're not outlining every single detail. So try to stick with just some of the main proportions. Look for the darkest shadows, the largest highlights that you can really outline and refine. But don't outline every single strand of hair, just outline again highlights and shadows within those sections, and that will really help for your portrait as you're starting to shade it in. I would try not to press too hard. Just double check after you draw a line, lift up your paper, make sure that it is transferring okay. But you don't want to leave harsh lines or marks in your paper, because when you start to shade, it could leave little divots of the area where you outline. So be sure not to press too hard, but just double check that you are pressing hard enough that some of those marks are showing up for you. It could help too to draw just some directional lines for your shading, so trace over the form a little bit as you're going, especially if you have a lot of the hair that you're trying to shade in. You can start to outline the direction that the hair is sitting there, and just really look for those dark areas of highlights and shadows that you can outline. So when you're finished, you'll have a nice outline of everything. But again, just keep lifting it up and down to see if you have areas that you need to go back and outline or add maybe a little bit more detail in certain areas. All right, so I'm going to skip to the end here. You can see again that I outlined most everything. Just double check that it's working, lift up your paper, and try to incorporate the highlights and shadows the best you can to get a good overall outline for your value change along with proportions.